Welcome to Libo University and the video tutorial series for the certification of the Pomana Funeral Expense Benefit. This segment 3 is titled The 5 Stages of Grief. At the end of this tutorial, you should become familiarized with the 5 stages of death, being denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Identifying symptoms of grief and what treatments are there for grief. The purpose of this segment is to help you understand how potential clients can be coping with the recent loss of a loved one. Empathy and sympathy become second nature as we know how grief expressed is part of the circle of life and love. The 5 stages of grief. The stages of grief and mourning are universal and are experienced by people from all walks of life across many cultures. Mourning occurs in response to an individual's own terminal illness, the loss of a close relationship, or to the death of a valued being, whether human or animal. In our bereavement, we spend different lengths of time working through each step and express each stage with different levels of intensity. The 5 stages of loss do not necessarily occur in any specific order. We often move between stages before achieving a more peaceful acceptance of death. In 1969, Swiss psychiatrist Elisabeth Kubler-Ross described 5 popular stages of grief, popularly referred to as the DABDAB. They include denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Kubler-Ross's model was based off her work with terminally ill patients and has received much criticism in the years since, mainly because people studying her model mistakenly believe the stages are the specific order in which people grieve and that all people must go through all stages. Kubler-Ross now notes that these stages are not linear and some people may not experience any of them. Yet still, others might only undergo 2 stages rather than all 5, 1 stage, 3 stages, etc. It is now more readily known that these 5 stages of grief are the most commonly experienced by the grieving population. Denial. Denial is the first reaction to learning about the terminal illness, loss, or death of a loved one by denying the reality of the situation. It is characterized by avoidance, confusion, elation, shock, or fear. People often think, "This isn't happening. This can't be happening." It is a normal reaction to rationalize overwhelming emotions. A defense mechanism buffers the immediate shock of the loss. Accepting the reality of the loss is the beginning of the healing process, and the denial begins to fade. However, through this process, all the feelings denied begin to surface. Anger. As the masking effects of denial begin to wear, the reality and pain begin to emerge. The intense emotion is expressed as anger, frustration, irritation, or anxiety. This is a common stage to think, "Why me?" and "Life's not fair." The person grieving may look to blame others for the cause of the grief and also may redirect anger to close friends and family. Researchers and mental health professionals agree that anger is a necessary stage of grief and encourage the anger. It is not healthy to suppress feelings of anger. It is just a natural response, and perhaps arguably a necessary one. When grieving, feelings of disconnection from reality and abandonment emerge. The anger can be the binding back to reality and the bridge back to connecting again with people. Anger is a something to grasp onto and a natural step to healing. Bargaining. The bargaining stage may occur prior to loss, as well as after loss, as an attempt to negotiate pain away. The bargaining stage is characterized by attempting to negotiate with a higher power, someone or something, whether realistically or not, that has some control over the situation. The grieving person may make promises to God in return for the painful situation not to occur or for things to go back. In the bargaining stage, one may find themselves intensely focused on what they or others could have done differently in order to prevent the loss or change. While these thoughts may help begin to accept the loss or change by revealing the impact of the situation, these feelings can also lead to remorse and guilt that interfere with healing. Guilt is a common wingman of bargaining. What-if statements such as, "What if I had left the house 5 minutes sooner? The accident would have never happened." Or, what if I had encouraged him to go to the doctor 6 months ago, like I first thought? Then the cancer could have been found sooner and he could have been saved. Depression. Depression is a commonly accepted form of grief. In fact, most people associate depression immediately with grief, as it is a present emotion. It represents the emptiness, sadness, and regret we feel when we are living in reality and realize the person now is gone. In this stage, one might withdraw from life, feel numb, live in a fog, and not want to get out of bed. The world might seem too much or too overwhelming to face. They do not want to be around others, don't feel like talking, and experience feelings of hopelessness. They might even experience suicidal thoughts, thinking, what's the point of going on? Other types of depression include the reaction to practical implications relating to the loss, worry about the costs and burial, worry that, in grief, not enough time was spent with others that depend upon us. This phase may be eased by simple clarification and a few kind words. Private depression is more subtle and is quiet preparation to separate and to bid loved ones farewell. Sometimes, all one really needs is a hug. Acceptance. The last stage of grief identified by Kubler-Ross is acceptance. Not in the sense that it's okay my husband died, but rather my husband died, but I'm gonna be okay. In this stage, emotions may begin to stabilize as one re-enters reality. Acceptance does not mean that the person feels good or right about the loss. Most people may never feel okay about the loss of a loved one or their own impending death. This stage is about accepting the fact that a new reality cannot be changed. It is about seeing how the new reality will impact life and relationships. Acceptance can usually be seen by an individual taking ownership for themselves and their actions. They appear to be more content as they journey toward a more normalized life. Soon, efforts may start to reach out to a select handful of trusted people. Involvement with friends begins to follow. Life continues, never the same, but always enriched by the loved one's presence, ever pressing forward toward hope. Identifying symptoms of grief. Grief symptoms may present themselves physically, socially, or spiritually. Some of the most common symptoms of grief are crying, headaches, difficulty sleeping, questioning the purpose of life, questioning spiritual beliefs, even belief in God, feelings of detachment, isolation from friends and family, abnormal behavior, worry, anxiety, frustration, guilt, fatigue, anger, loss of appetite, aches and pains, and stress. Treatments for grief. The prescription of medication and engagement in counseling have been the most common methods of treating grief. Initially, a doctor may prescribe medications to help relieve the symptoms of grief. Some doctors choose not to prescribe medications because they believe they are doing a disservice for the grieving process. That is, if a doctor prescribes anti-anxiety pills or sedation pills, one may not truly experience the grief in full effect, potentially interfering with the 5 stages of grief and eventual acceptance of reality. Counseling is a much more solid approach toward grief. Support groups, bereavement groups, or individual counseling can help work through unresolved grief. This is a beneficial treatment alternative when the grief event is creating obstacles in everyday life. This by no means cures the loss, but rather it provides coping strategies to help deal with the grief in an effective way. Things to remember. There is no finish line. This is not a race. Grief has its own lifespan, unique to each individual. Grief shifts and changes, sometimes heavy, sometimes light. Anger will happen. So will fear, peace, joy, guilt, confusion, and a range of other emotions. One will flash back and forth through many feelings, often several of them at once. There is no way to do grief wrong. It may be painful, but it is never wrong. And remember, there is no closure. Grief is part of love, and love evolves. Even acceptance is not final. It continuously shifts and changes. Knowing and understanding how individuals cope with grief, loss, and trauma can foster the respect, sympathy, and empathy needed to convey our Pamana funeral expense benefit to your client as we grow nationwide. This third segment in the Pamana Certification Tutorial Series has familiarized you with the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, identifying symptoms of grief, and common treatments for grief. Thank you for your interest in becoming a certified Pamana advocate. We hope this brief tutorial was helpful as you grow with us. Please proceed to the next quiz section, and best of luck.